Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Melanie. This is Adventures in Hostessville, and welcome to episode 18 of the Vintage Magazine Project and the second week of the May 1933 Everyday Science and Mechanics.
Ba-da-bum, ba-dum-bum, bum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
So the article I want to take a look at today is called Hanging Baskets of Cord, which is directions to make this hanging plant holder. But before they even tell you how to make it, they've got this little inset at the top which says how to make money with this article. The cost of materials is so slight that they need scarcely be considered. The articles may be sold to store or by house-to-house canvas, and then they tell you the right kind of stores to go to and how you can set up discounts for bulk sales, and then they tell you how to make the basket. And the reason I think that it's so focused on this is that this magazine comes out at the very worst part of the Depression. About 25% of the American public is unemployed. So imagine that you're unemployed with no end to that in sight. The economy has tanked, and you have just found out that the person that you would probably guess is the richest person in America doesn't pay any taxes. As you might have guessed from this lathe-working man on the cover, there's a real lathe theme. I don't have a lathe. So the first thing you're supposed to use the lathe for is to create a wooden cone as a frame. I'm just gonna use this funnel, I think. Although they do warn you to make sure it's completely straight, because if it's a little convex or concave, it won't work. I court disaster. So the first thing they say I need to do is take a pair of dividers, which I finally figured out they meant this thing that I've always called a protractor. But I need to make a circle. They say any kind of heavy craft paper will work. I am going to use this poster I have with this subliminal message on it. So people have voted fairly recently in 1933. FDR has been elected. He is inaugurated in March of 1933. And Senate is in the middle of an investigation into what went wrong with the stock market crash in 1929. And they're having a rough time with this commission because they can't really get a special counsel. A bunch of people turned it down. Somebody quit. I think at least one person was let go. And at this point, Congress is kind of like, we just need somebody in here to wind this down. And somebody recommends Ferdinand Pecora. And somebody else pipes up and is like, yeah, I was thinking about him too. So they bring this guy in, and Ferdinand Pecora is willing to do it, but he is not interested in winding this thing down. He is instead like, I would like full subpoena power, and here I go. Is this a good size? That's too big. So Ferdinand Pecora, at this point, is a private prosecutor. He is a Sicilian immigrant. His family moved to America when he was, I don't know, 5 or something like that. And he's got the typical immigrant experience, right? His dad's a cobbler, there are 7 kids, they live in this cold water apartment underneath the L. He is delivering eggs and newspapers after school to make money, and he ends up going to law school. I think he goes through night school, and he passes the bar and becomes a lawyer. And this is a big deal because at the point when he does this, there are 15,000 approximately lawyers in the United States. 39 of them are Italian American. He ultimately ends up as the assistant district attorney in the state of New York, but he does not become district attorney, and then he goes into private practice, and that's where he is when Congress comes calling. A 1-inch circle at the bottom. Okay, so Pecora has sort of made a name for himself going after corruption specifically in finance. And so Congress is like, well, let's see if he can do it at this higher level. So Pecora comes in and he takes over this commission, and he starts subpoenaing all these super powerful men. And again, it's a big deal because as much as there was an anti-immigrant thing when he was a kid, there still is, and it's really specifically anti-Italian at this point. There's this assumption that Italians in general are just kind of dumb, and Southern Italians specifically, like he is from Sicily, are all criminals. We're also at the height of the gangster era here. Al Capone has just finally been sent to prison in 1932, so there is this sort of public feeling. So now I wrap this around here and see how big it needs to be. And then I have to glue it together. So I need glue. So one of the first people that Pecora calls in is this guy named Sunshine Charlie Mitchell. And apparently the Sunshine nickname is kind of a joke because nothing about this guy makes you think of sunshine. Charles Mitchell is the president of National City Bank, which is still around today, of course. Now it is just called Citibank. And he has done a lot to change how banking works. One of the things that he has done is that he has got this commercial bank, but he also then starts this investment side of the bank, and they are only separate in name. Up until this point, largely it's just rich people that invest, and Mitchell's like, no, 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 there's so much more money out there. So he hires about 2,000 employees to spread throughout the country and talk lower income people, middle class people into investing. And it works. They get a lot more investors, but then they kind of run out of decent securities to sell, so they start selling crap, like Peruvian junk bonds, like stuff that they know is going to fail. And because they're so combined, you might go in to set up a checking account and they say, oh, don't you also want to do some investments? But if you can't afford it, then they go back to the commercial bank and they're like, don't forget we do loans, right? So it's back and forth. So people are buying these securities, sometimes with a loan of about 90%. So let's say that this stock costs $100, they've only got $10, they're loaned $90 saying, oh, you're gonna make your money back right away, but the company knows that this stock is almost certainly going to fail. This isn't illegal. At this point, there is a little bit of regulation in banking, but there is absolutely none on Wall Street. But the Pecora Commission is kind of the first time that the public finds this out. And they're not really that happy about it. Does that look like a plant holder? Maybe. I don't know. Okay, it's time to start getting some cord going. They said to use 1/16 inch hemp rope. I don't have that. I have this stuff that I don't know what it is or why it was in my basement. So that's what I'm going to use. Where Pecora is really able to get Mitchell is he starts asking him about his personal finances, which are related because as a partner in the business, then he can count those business capital gains or losses on his private income. So it's come out that this guy's been giving himself $1 million bonuses, but also claims like a complete business loss on his taxes in 32. And he says, well, yeah, that's because I had to sell these 18,000 shares of National City Bank stock, and I pretty much took a loss on it. So Pecora is so good at the theater of cross-examination also that he waits until the very end of the day and he says, now, Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to get back to what you were saying about that total loss you took. Is it not true that you sold those 18,000 shares at a loss to a family member? And the audience is like, it's this big dun 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 dramatic reveal. And it turns out that yes, in fact, Mitchell sold the shares to his wife. So basically, he's like, baby, listen, I need your help. I'm gonna put these in your name. We'll say that you bought them at a loss. And so now we have all the stocks, but we also don't have to claim any income tax. He is, I believe, indicted for tax evasion. He is ultimately acquitted of it. There's a civil suit and he has to pay, I think, $1 million fine. But ultimately, the biggest thing is that it ends his career. That's going well for Pecora, but he's not done because he's like, I got a little free time still. Let's call in J.P. Morgan. Okay, so here's what's happening with my little monkey party hat here. I have got a nail in the end of it, right there, and that is holding in the hangers that are going to be to hang it up, and then also the end of my long string that is going to go around it and become the wrapping. I went out of frame. This is another thing that's supposed to happen with a lathe, and I haven't acquired one in the last couple of minutes. So I'm going to try to hook it up to this drill. I read on the internet that you can do that. I can't imagine that this is going to work. Would this be easier if I had a lathe? I don't know. I don't know how to use a lathe anyway. Now, JP Morgan he's old money. He's a third generation banker. Yes, his company also took a big hit after the stock market crash, but he still lives in his mansion and he still has his private guards and all of his assistants and things. Like, JP Morgan is not selling apples. He's not standing in a bread line. So he comes in and Pecora starts in on him with the how much did you pay in taxes in the last couple of years? Jack Morgan says, you'd really be better off talking to my assistants. And Pecora is like, I want to hear it from you. JP Morgan admits before Congress that in 1931 and 1932 he paid $0 in taxes. And the American public is outraged. The crowd is noisy, they're restless. Senator Glass of Virginia at one point says, this is as bad as a circus in here. All we need are the peanuts and colored lemonade. And as if this case isn't crazy enough already, Ringling Brothers hears that and they're like, hey, free publicity. And somehow they managed to sneak in one of their entertainers, this woman named Leah Graff, who is famous for being the world's shortest woman. She's 27 inches tall. And they sneak into this hearing and just drop her on JP Morgan's lap. And they're like, the world's shortest woman wants to meet the world's richest man. It's so weird. But it does lead to some actual changes happening in regulation. So the Glass-Steagall Act is passed shortly after that. And this had been kicking around in Congress for a while. Suddenly there's all this outrage, and so they're able to swing it through. And what the Glass-Steagall Act says is that you have to have separation between commercial and investment banks. And it allows for federal deposit insurance. So that's what allows the FDIC. Also then shortly after that, the Securities Act is passed and then the SEC is founded. And at the time, there was this big discussion about what's the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. One is illegal and the other one is just smart business. And there's sort of this statement going around that, it's 1933, we're in the middle of the Depression. It is your patriotic duty to pay these taxes. And if you don't, even if you don't have to, that makes you a bad, morally bankrupt person. On the other hand, you've got, Business Week magazine putting out an article saying, if Morgan and Mitchell hadn't availed themselves of all of these loopholes, then they're just dumb. The question starts to get asked, so it's only poor people that have to pay taxes? Because if you're rich, you can pay the best minds in business to find you all the loopholes and get you out of having to pay anything. But if you're poor and you can't afford that and you didn't have a multi-million-dollar corporation in the first place to take those losses off of, well, I guess your kids can't have new shoes because you have to pay your income taxes. I don't know what I'm doing. This isn't working, and now I am all riled up. Okay. That one stuck. That one stuck? That one not stuck. What? So it said that I should shellac the outside. I'm going to call the modern version of shellac Mod Podge. I don't know. This didn't go exactly as I planned. The whole Pecora commission didn't go 100% as Pecora planned either. He wrote a book about it a couple of years later where he said, I have complete faith in the ability of these guys to come up with circumvents and runarounds and financial malfeasance in the future. And of course, he sort of rightly thought that he might be asked to head the SEC, and he wasn't. FDR asked Joseph Kennedy instead, who was, a lot of people were like, really? He seems like he might be part of the problem, but FDR was like, well, then he knows what to look for. But Pecora did end up becoming commissioner, and the two of them, he and Kennedy, actually worked together fairly well. And ultimately, Pecora ended up on the New York State Supreme Court, which he stayed on until he was 87. And then he died a couple years later at the age of 89. So here it is, my hanging basket plant holder. I don't know that I'm going to be able to use these as a money maker, going door to door or selling them at a gift or novelty shop. Although it is novel. Hold on. Hi, come on in. That's okay. Hold on one second. I just need to shut off the camera. Mom is here.